You're listening to Puma Podcast.
Yeah, there's a possibility of shifting the power. And when that happened, I think the international community need to be ready. So that's why I've been saying the international community need to start now. Okay. Because there's a highly possible, as you can see, how the Myanmar military is on the downward spiral.
It's been 3 years since Myanmar's military seized power from the country's democratically elected government. But the coalition of pro-democracy forces fighting the junta has not lost steam. I'm Bella Perez Rubio, Puma Podcast, and you're listening to Teka Teka News. In this episode, an expert on Myanmar security and politics delivers an update and tells us what we, as neighboring countries in the region, must do to help.
In recent years, Myanmar appeared to be on a path to democracy, with the election of Aung San Suu Kyi and her party, the National League for Democracy. However, this journey was abruptly halted when the military in February 2021 ousted the popularly elected government, leading to widespread international condemnation and sparking the Spring Revolution.
That's James Minnick, a retired U.S. Army colonel, and a professor at the Daniel K. Inouye Asia-Pacific Center for Security Studies, the decades-old Department of Defense institute behind this forum.
The international community is in a quandary over how to respond effectively, striving to balance the provision of humanitarian aid with the intricacies of diplomatic and economic sanctions. The crisis in Myanmar transcends local borders, having significant implications for regional stability and strategic competition in the Indo-Pacific. The involvement of neighboring countries and global powers in the crisis introduces additional complexity to an already convoluted geopolitical scenario.
To make matters more complicated, at least 2 major conflicts have captured the international community's attention and resources since Myanmar's junta plunged the country into chaos 3 years ago: Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine and the escalation of the Israel-Palestine conflict. To catch us up on what's happening in Myanmar, here's Dr. Mimi Win Bird, an Asia-Pacific security analyst. She's Burmese-American and a former lieutenant colonel of the U.S. Army.
Well, I want everybody to know that instability was instigated by the Myanmar military. It started with the coup, and it didn't stop at the coup. It's tried to, violently crack down the peaceful protester. So people felt like they don't have any other choice but to, protect themselves.
As of February 29, 2024, the Assistance Association for Political Prisoners in Myanmar counts 4,611 who have been killed since the 2021 coup. Over 26,000 have been arrested, about 20,000 of whom are still detained.
As you know, in this type of conflict, the people are the power, not so much firepower. Myanmar military has so much more firepower, 100 times more than the people, but they have less than 10% of people supporting them. The data show that over 90% after 3 years of conflict still reject the military.
Why would that be, you think?
Because I think they got the strategy all wrong from the beginning, right? This was all about political problem, right?
This is exactly right.
Yeah, they try to use the military to solve the political issue. And it's all about hearts and mind, capturing people's hearts and mind. And you bomb the houses and the towns, and then you brutally crack down people. You're not going to win hearts and mind. The only thing they have in their arsenal, per se, is fear. Why are they doing this? They want to submit people into submission by fear. It can turn into anger.
That's right.
And that's what has happened.
And we spoke earlier about how this is having significant ramifications into defections. We were talking about how they've instituted the draft, right?
Yeah, nationwide.
Maybe you elaborate a little bit on that.
Yes, well, that also an indicator of them not having enough people anymore. They have seen the unprecedented level of defection. Defection at the unit level, the whole unit defecting, like the biggest one, 6,500 person troop, unit that defected. And you have like a battalion defecting all the time. Every time they have a ground skirmishes, they have more killed in action than the opposition side, despite they have the firepower, right? And then the surrender. And lately, there's been the whole unit surrender. Even though they still have firepower, they're surrendering because they don't have the will to fight anymore. Why? Because they don't have the support of the people. In Myanmar history, the Burma majority and the ethnic groups, right, they have never fought side by side together.
Okay.
In fact, some cases, they have fought on the opposite side, right? This is the first time they're fighting side by side.
The coup has been devastating for Myanmar. Thousands have died, and many are now living in poverty. But unlike the military, the people have not lost their will. Against all odds, they've managed to keep more than half their country out of junta control.
And they knew that they have to do it themselves. There's nobody's going to come and help them. So it forced them to cooperate. And I say unify, to a degree they are unifying, but I think unity is a very high bar.
It is.
But I think they can cooperate. And that the habits of cooperation that they are developing will go a long way in post-conflict as they develop federal democracy or some type of a collective governance together.
We'll pause here. We'll get into what the international community can do to help later.
Humanitarian assistance is really, really needed in Myanmar. And a lot of the international community feel like they have to work with the military to deliver the international aid. But in fact, what our data is showing is that less than half the country is under the control of military. And the area that are needing the most humanitarian assistance is under the control of either the PDF-NUG.
That's the armed wing of the democratically elected National Unity Government.
Either the PDF-NUG and the Ethnic Armed Organization, EAOs. So if you really are serious about wanting to deliver international aid, right, you have to work through those organizations. You can't work through the military.
Would you give a proposal or recommendation on how that would be done?
Right. So it's important is the neighboring country, right? Because you have to physically get the aid in.
That's right.
So they're working with the neighboring country like Thailand, India, Bangladesh, and even China to get the aid in from that part, because those border areas are now all under the control of the ethnic armed organization. It is no longer the control of the military junta. So if the international community work with the military, they're more likely to direct the aid to where they control, but those are not the area that need the aid most.
That's right.
What they're doing is they're bombing the countryside, all the the periphery.
I wonder if you're familiar with any examples of success yet in that model of distributing humanitarian aid from the borders, or is that just something we need to approach now?
Yeah, they are. And especially it has to do with the women's group.
Okay.
The women's group are the most active group of people that are delivering aid through their network from the border area into the needed areas. And so they have a huge network, and I think that those are they can do more. They have more capacity if you were able to help them, but they just have short on resources to get it in there. So working with those type of youth groups, the women group have been very active in delivering, but they just need more resources.
Bird says it's mostly large regional powers like China, India, and Russia who have to rethink their cooperation with Myanmar's military.
They are now working with military, thinking that Myanmar military is too big to fail. But in fact, they're not understanding is that as long as the Myanmar is dealing with the military junta, it will never be stable or peaceful. And that put all of their investments and their project at risk.
Meanwhile, she says countries in the West must go beyond imposing sanctions. But smaller countries in the region, including the Philippines, have a role to play as well.
But diplomatic support side, right? I think that diplomatic support to the NUG government and the ethnic group on this creating the humanitarian corridor.
Yes.
By helping them negotiate with the neighboring countries, it could go a long way. ASEAN, is stuck. So helping ASEAN reframe it and understand that Myanmar issue is not just an internal issue, it has a larger implication, wider security implication for the neighbors and the region is also needed. Yeah, there's a possibility of shifting the power. And when that happens, I think the international community need to be ready. So that's why I've been saying the international community need to start now.
Okay.
Because there's a highly possible, as you can see, how the Myanmar military is on the downward spiral. And when that happened, I think that's cooperation, right? Trying to draw on that foundation of habits of cooperation is really, really important. And they're providing platforms where they can come together to negotiate.
Now, perhaps, is the time that it needs to start working on it, not after a power shift occurs and say, boy, we ought to do something now, as momentum will be lost if you wait until then, right?
Right.
And a loss of momentum could alter the dynamics of this fight between the powers.
Less than half the countries under the military control. So all the other areas are under the control of various ethnic groups and various NUG and PDFs. So we can start helping them with a local governance, right? So we have to practice principle of democracy in their area, and which will make them prepare for the overall, federal state or confederacy, whatever they wanted to come up with, right? But if they don't have their area, under the democratic principle, then it'll be hard for them at the national level. Yeah.
The military is scrambling to bolster its forces, imposing mandatory conscription on 5,000 citizens per month, starting this February 2024. But there are already reports of young people either fleeing or joining opposition forces instead. Experts like Bird have also cast doubt on whether the junta, plagued with rampant corruption, can provide for recruits.
So I share some of your optimism that maybe a power shift could occur, but equally we could find ourselves in a bit of a stalemate, kind of where we're at right now, status quo, this time next year. And if we find ourselves continually in this quagmire, what do we do? What can be done? How do we help?
Again, it's that quagmire is possible if people don't cooperate, right? There's resistant forces, and people have to work together to move it forward. So yes, there's a possibility they are unable to come together, they're unable to cooperate better to get to the end point. Right? They have reached the tipping point with, so far, their level of cooperation, but more cooperation is needed to the end point. For the international community, appeasing the military is just making that,
Prolonged.
Prolong the fight and prolong the suffering. Military is absolutely illegitimate, and they are not in control of the country anymore, so there's no need to appease them.
And that was today's episode of Teka Teka News. Again, I'm Bella Perez Rubio. Pidoy Blanco edited this episode. Our executive producer is Jill Caro, and our senior news editor is Veronica Uy. If you found this episode useful, share it with a friend or two, and thanks for listening.